Good morning and welcome everybody to our 10th episode of Africa Talks. Exceptionally, as you see, coming out of the SKP lab, an innovation lab in Berlin, Germany. My IJP colleague Eka and we really welcome you to this special edition, our so-called season final.
Africa Talks is designed as a digital platform for exchange of African and European topics. Exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists and experts from civil society, from both continents. We want to learn, engage, and discuss about what are the impacts and consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm Marco Vollmer. I'm a member of the board of IJP International Programs, and I would like to introduce also Eka, my colleague, to you.
I'm Eka Neumann. I'm the coordinator of the African program of the International Journalism Programs, and I'm looking forward to today's topic.
Our topic of today is Africa and Europe, a new partnership for a post-COVID-19 world. And we are very delighted to welcome our guest of honor, Professor Dr. Horst Köhler, former Federal President of Germany. Welcome to Africa Talks.
Thank you.
Horst Köhler studied economics at the University of Tübingen, from which he graduated in 1969. He obtained a PhD in economics in 1977 and then started his civil service career in the Federal Ministry of Economics in Bonn.
In 1990, he was appointed as State Secretary by Federal Finance Minister Theo Weigel. In that capacity, Mr. Köhler negotiated both the German monetary union and the withdrawal of Soviet troops from East Germany. He also was Germany's chief negotiator of the Maastricht Treaty on the Economic and Monetary Union and the personal representative, the so-called Sherpa, of Chancellor Helmut Kohl for several G7 summits.
In 2000, Horst Köhler was appointed as the new managing director of the International Monetary Fund, a position he held until 2004.
And on May 23, Horst Köhler was elected the 9th president of the Federal Republic of Germany. He took office in July 2004 and was re-elected for a second term in May 2009. Domestically, he emphasized the importance of stronger sustainability policies to safeguard the planet for future generations and to create and preserve jobs fit for the future. He also argued for significant improvements in Germany's educational system and for finding creative answers to the challenges posed by demographic change. Concerning international affairs, President Köhler also advocated strongly for a true partnership with Africa, and he resigned from office on 31st May 2010.
From 2016 to 2017, Horst Köhler co-chaired together with Kofi Annan a special panel advertising the African Development Bank on the implementation of its strategies.
And in August 2017, Horst Köhler was appointed by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres to be his personal envoy for Western Sahara, a position he held until May 2019. During his tenure, the parties to the conflict and the neighboring countries met for the first time in 6 years to discuss the way forward in the political process to solve the conflict.
Today, President Köhler continues to hold an honorary professorship at the University of Tübingen and is active in many honorary posts, as well as a speaker and publicist. Welcome.
Again, welcome to the show, President Köhler. Welcome to Africa Talks. And as already mentioned, Africa and Europe, a new partnership for post-COVID-19 world. We are listening to your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. After listening to this presentation, I have the feeling I'm a pretty old man, but I still enjoy to be with you and have this kind of interchange. Many thanks to you, Marco Vollmer and Eka Neumann, for bridging these difficult times where you can't meet in flesh with these Africa Talks. It's a good idea. A special welcome to all the current and former scholarships holders from both continents. With your work, you contribute to shape the way we perceive each other, and thereby also contribute to shape our actions. And that is much needed, because Africa is changing much faster than the image of it. The title of our talks suggests a new partnership for a post-COVID world. Now, we still are in the midst of the pandemic that has wreaked havoc all over the world. I hope it will be a wake-up call that makes it clear to everyone. Interdependency is the political reality in the 21st century. That is what we have to learn. Everyone. To me, the most important step is to understand Africa as a real partner, not as an object of care or fear. Africa and Europe have a special closeness through history and geography. Europeans should finally move beyond attitudes of superiority or power or wealth. We should acknowledge our differences as well as our common interests, and come to a basis, on this basis, to solidarity. And hopefully, that is what I really want to make clear, mutual learning. Mutual learning means also learning from each other. We need every single good-willing, innovative and engaged person to find solutions to all the big challenges that threaten us all in this 21st century. Europe has to finally realize to what degree the futures of our continents are intertwined. I am glad that the EU Commission and its President Ursula von der Leyen seems to be determined to tackle the necessities, challenges and benefits of a renewed partnership. Africa has a huge potential for wealth and well-being of its people. Huge potential. But far too long, governments have been talking about that potential instead of really tapping it, developing it, providing decent living conditions and perspectives to Africa's rapidly growing population requires, first and foremost, courageous and honest leaders in Africa. Let me add a disclaimer to all our exchange. I often get asked as an expert on Africa, but I'm not. I couldn't be, because there is no one Africa. Africa is a continent with extreme diversity and thus complexity of challenges. Should I nevertheless speak of Africa in the next hour? Please take it as an act of audacity. But for one thing, I'm sure that I'm right to generalize. Africans must get the chance to be vaccinated against COVID-19, like everybody in the world. There has been a lot of talking about vaccines as a global public good. We now must come to global cooperation for production and deliver this good to everybody. I fully agree with a recent statement of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and I quote, "There will be no economic or social recovery unless we prioritize an equal global health recovery. It is a matter of shared interest, not of charity." End of quote. Nobody will be safe until everyone is safe. So, dear fellows, dear listeners, I look forward to exploring all these questions in more depth.
Thank you, President Köhler. From your perspective, what are the most important steps now towards a new partnership?
Well, my answer is the following. I see three fundamental steps and some very urgent ones. First, Europe has to change perceptions about Africa and adapt to the new realities. Second, both sides must take their respective responsibilities. Africa, good governance and structural reform. Europe, no double standards and corresponding structural reforms here with us in Europe. The third, very basic step should be we need to build a strategic economic partnership to make Africa a global growth hub. That is possible and needed to deliver jobs and income to the African population. So the last point, urgent steps, most immediate steps, providing Africa access to vaccines, monetary liquidity, and also debt relief to overcome the economic difficulties.
Professor Köhler, you mentioned changing perceptions. Could you explain what you mean by changing perceptions?
Well, our European views of Africa often reveals more than about us than about African realities. There had been warnings that Africa would be overwhelmed by COVID-19, but in fact, it was rather Europe that appeared unprepared and overwhelmed, while the African response to COVID-19 showed readiness, cooperation, and innovation, especially with the new African Center for Disease Control under John Nkongasong. Very good, basis. But of course, there is a need for caution regarding the situation of COVID-19 in Africa. The second wave is hitting Africa countries possibly harder than the first one. And also in Africa, there are countries whose leaders downplay the severity of the coronavirus, and that is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. In a speech you said that we need, quote, to develop an awareness of our long repressed colonial past, end of quote. How do you think that could be achieved?
Well, Africa, meanwhile, has agency. Europe finally must stop seeing Africa as an object, as a continent always acted upon. It should understand it as a political subject with own visions, agency, and options for action. They have own options, and we should understand it. And Africa develops already an agency also worldwide. For example, the common position of the EU member states at the climate conference in Copenhagen, where they clearly pointed to the developed countries, climate change is something which is threatening us, and was a very strong voice in this Copenhagen meeting. I am very pleased that they also think about an African passport, meaning the integration of a huge continent to one understanding. And I see also the African continent-wide free trade zone as a strategic project to underline that they have their own vision for the future. And it is good that Europe and Germany are strong advocates of cooperative global politics, but anyone who wants multilateralism to succeed must also be prepared to invest political energy in the long overdue reform of the United Nations, and in particular of the United Nations Security Council, not least to give Africa a stronger voice there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Africa and Europe and the new partnership between these two continents should be based on a collaboration, especially politically. And Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, did her first visit abroad, when she was appointed, to the headquarters of the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa. The European Commission presented a draft of a so-called comprehensive strategy with Africa in March 2020. Is this an opportunity for a new start?
I think so. There clearly is political will on both sides, and that's good. And the pandemic is the most recent wake-up call to the urgency of a policy of interdependency. We need shared solutions that help all of us. But the pandemic has stalled the necessary process. The EU-AU summit in autumn 2020 has been postponed. To be optimistic, that gives us time, both sides, to reflect and prepare for the meeting to discuss common positions. Both sides, Europe and Africa, must clarify their top priorities and define the way forward towards cooperation. Therefore, I welcome that a new Africa-Europe Foundation, which was founded last year, I think in December last year, has offered its help in terms of discussing the content of cooperation. And this offer was accepted by the European Commission and the African Union Commission. The Africa-Europe Foundation has created 5 so-called strategic groups discussing first health, digital, agriculture and sustainable food systems, energy and green transformation, and last but not least, transport and connectivity. I think with these kind of items or content points, they can give input to the political considerations between the leadership of Europe and Africa. A new start for cooperation also requires, and I'm underlining that, requires also better coordination of EU member states diverging Africa policies, because there's also a need for being better coordinated, and it requires also, and beyond all difficulties, that the African countries find their own priorities.
And as you said, 5 fields have been defined, but what should be the top priorities from your perspective?
Besides the immediate needs, and we will come, I'm sure, back to this later, a new partnership should respect the institutional framework of the AU and be tailored to African priorities and not to kind of European wishful thinking or priorities. First, invest in education and exchange. Very important point for this continent with its huge young population. China offers grants to tens of thousands of African students. Germany and Europe should scale up exchange programs and scholarships. What we need is not brain drain, which draws the best talent away, what I observe in the world. But we need brain circulation with Africa. The international journalist programs are a very good example for that, and I'm grateful for that. Second point, faster and more effective technology transfer. We are talking about this, but it's a little slow, here a bit and there a bit. Faster and more efficient technology transfer. There is also room for experimenting together in technology questions and for big win-win projects. The German government, for instance, rightly so, focuses on cooperation with Africa in its national hydrogen strategy. My third point, what is, say, kind of priorities. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a crucial project for economic and political integration in Africa. It will boost growth and job creation, but it requires hard and difficult work. Europe should continue to offer all the possible technical support to the implementation, from harmonizing of tax laws and reduction of tariffs to the harmonization of standards, collective bargaining with external actors, and exchange of expertise and training and services. And Europe should come forward with ideas on how to invest in infrastructure and local production, how to help building industrial clusters and enable vocational training. I have no doubt that's really the potential which we should tap to create income and jobs in Africa.
Last question on that point here, political collaboration. In different statements and speeches, you mentioned that Africa and Europe have mutual responsibility. What do you mean by this? Where are the responsibilities on both sides?
Well, responsibility for the development in Africa lies, of course, first and foremost with Africans themselves. And it requires, first of all, I mentioned it already, good governance in Africa. The IPRIME Index of African governance measures progress in areas such as the rule of law, participation, people's participation, education or health. Since the turn to the 21st century, it has, this index, recorded slow but steady progress. But unfortunately, the last 2 years, it documented also a decrease of regression. And this needs to be seen and to be assessed. For example, constitutions get revised to allow leaders to stay forever in the power. This undermines the core foundation of democracy, that is, power is only conceded for a limited time. Press freedom is another fundament that recently has been challenged in Africa in some countries. On the 2020 World Press Freedom Index map, 21 African countries appear in red or black. That's an alarming signal, meaning that those who produce news and information are working in difficult, even critical conditions. These are worrying developments, to be honest. It is necessary to speak out, but without, from the perspective of Europe, from the north, without self-righteousness. Because in other parts of the world, even in Europe, events have shown the fragility of freedom and democracy too. Africans themselves speak out loudly about all these difficulties with governments, the governance in Africa. An example, Jackie Chilias, a South African, you may know him, the founder of the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa, in his book named Africa First, he underlined Africa First means also first honest and accountable leadership in Africa. That is an African who made it clear. The most courageous protests against corruption and bad governance come from the ranks of African civil society itself, and I know about it. And a survey carried out by the polling organization Afrobarometer indicated that a majority of Africans consider democratic accountability to be more important than the mere efficiency of their government. That is very an encouraging sign. Of course, we need efficiency of government in Africa too, but that there has this expression of wisdom, awareness of accountability. That is something which gives democracy roots, and therefore I think we should appreciate that. African political will and responsibility so are key. But there is also a European responsibility, a strong European responsibility. And I bring here forward 3 points. First, illicit financial flows in a dimension of, possibly every year between $50 and $100 billion from Africa away. Illicit financial flows flow also on European bank accounts. Providing the necessary tools and legislation for transparency is also the duty of us here in Europe and in the global north on the whole. And Europe should advocate for a new global taxation structure which grants African countries access to a fair share of taxes and places limits on base erosion and profit shifting by international companies. Big issue. The OECD is discussing this, but the progress is, at least from my perspective, too slow here. A second point, trade rules and subsidies need to be reviewed in order, from European trade rules and subsidies needs to be reviewed in order to offer African economies the chance to diversify their economies and move up in global value chains. You see, the diversification of the African economies is a crucial point to provide jobs and income for the population there. Third point in this context, agriculture is important, not only for food security, but also for job creation in Africa. No doubt that hunger and dependency on food imports in Africa is also due to domestic political failures in Africa. But Europe's agricultural system, with its regulations and its billions in subsidies, makes it more difficult for Africans to build up a competitive agricultural business there. And at the same time, there is no longer any doubt that our European industrial agriculture comes at the expense of soil, groundwater, and biodiversity. A mutual Landwende, a German word, land transition, as proposed by a German expert panel on sustainability, could bring benefits to both continents. Europe should convert from industrial to ecological agriculture and use public funds to reward ecological value creation rather than land ownership. Africa, in turn, would have then more space for its own productive agricultural business with jobs and income for millions of people. Though there is a conclusion out of these examples. The necessary structural transformation in Africa needs to be supported also by change in the industrialized world, in this case, in the European economies. Maybe here, in particular, this corresponding relationship between transformation lies the real test for a new partnership.
I have a question in connection with what you just said. Trade rules need to be reviewed. So some African countries and groups have negotiated economic partnership agreements, EPAs, with the EU. What is your impression of these trade agreements?
Well, I think the economic partnership agreements had been a positive step. It was negotiated, but I think it's time, looking to the reality on the ground, to review these partnership agreements. And in particular, I see 3 questions for this review from both sides. First, do they provide African countries with sufficient support for the development of agricultural and industrial value creation? Do they provide enough support for the diversification of the African economies? Second point, do they offer even sufficient protection for African, what they call infant industries, who will and should come up? And the third point, my third point is, do they help or possibly obstruct the implementation of the African free trade zone? These are 3 kind of questions where I feel it would be helpful if this would be reviewed from both sides.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Area, which includes 54 African states. Once established, it will be the largest trade area in the world in terms of number of participating countries since the foundation of the World Trade Organization. This leads to high expectations, you already also mentioned, and that there's a huge impact on trade, on travel of goods to generate growth and prosperity, and to generate income for millions of people, as you also mentioned. So what are your expectations, maybe from your personal feeling? What could be examples of this?
Well, here I'm speaking as an economist, so more has to happen than just a free trade zone. But it is clear that the African continental-wide free trade zone is an important strategic lever to boost growth and job creation in Africa. And I said earlier already that I believe this continent has the potential for becoming a hub for global growth. And therefore, this free trade zone is a strategic lever to explore it. The free trade zone should reduce Africa's over-reliance on exporting commodities. And by the way, we always have this experience that, for instance, oil or other natural resources. We know that oil, meanwhile, is not a blessing, it's a curse for also countries in Africa. And therefore, we need to point out that diversification, getting rid of being dependent of just natural resources, exporting to the industrialized world, has to be the point number one of economic interest. And that requires building up also a manufacturing industry in Africa and more intra-regional trade, especially in manufactured products. This would increase opportunities for trained and untrained workers. To date, 35 of the African Union's 55 member states have ratified already the agreement, the African Free Trade Zone. The new Secretary General of this AFCFTA, Wamkele Mene from South Africa, has taken up work. Good start. And but we need also to be aware this project, the African Continental-Wide Free Trade Zone, faces enormous challenges due to the number of nations and their geographical and historical diversities. So it will take time, but it deserves all possible support to bring it forward. And I will speak up in this direction whenever I can.
Due to COVID-19, Africa has entered in 2020 into the first time in 25 years in recession. So progress in poverty reduction will suffer and face a brutal setback. From your perspective, which developments do you foresee in the light of COVID-19, and especially where is the hope in this?
Well, first, in many sub-Saharan countries, the COVID-19 pandemic, that's reality, may bring a considerable setback of years of hard-won development gains and upend livelihoods of millions. That is also reality. This is open, this question. According to the latest bank report, economies in sub-Saharan Africa region contracted by 2.8% in 2020. Recovery is expected this year to around 3% growth, 2021. But this still means a huge setback, because we know that Africa needs an average of 5 to 7% to overcome extreme poverty. That we know already that the COVID pandemic made it harder to overcome this extreme poverty. And 5 to 7% growth is possible for African countries. So where does hope come from? Africa did not sit passively and wait for the pandemic to devastate their economies. The AU appointed 4 eminent personalities, and I know them, and I know they have competence and also energy to express their views. That is, of course, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is now moving to another, Donald Kaberuka, who was minister in Rwanda and then head of the African Development Bank, Tidjane Thiam, and also Trevor Manuel, also a South African former finance minister. These are special envoys to engage with multilateral institutions at the political area, pushing forward for African interest and not least debt relief, which is needed. The AU quickly also established a continental COVID-19 response fund. It raised $400 million for medical supplies, tests, and socio-economic support to the most vulnerable. These have been encouraging sign of African agency and cooperation. The acceleration of digital transformation driven by the pandemic will contribute to the modernization of African economies, no doubt. And we are behind the curve in Germany in particular regarding the modernization of our economy here. Digital payments in Africa are far ahead of German digital payments. African startups provided digital solutions to counter the pandemic. I give you an example. I have looked at it and found, for instance, the Fed Lab from Kenya. It has developed an application called M-Safari. If you board a public transport, Matutu, right? With this app, you can register your ride and later track and inform about possible sources of infection. Meanwhile, over 640 tech hubs are active across the continent. Digital solutions are being tested in agriculture, manufacturing, services. So I see here hope for this big objective, diversifying African economies, also regarding building up a services economy. Another reason for hope is the boost in renewable energy due to falling prices for solar and wind, making the much needed access to electricity for all kinds of economic activity easier. And a sign of hope, at least for me, because I know these people, is also that African leadership is getting visible on the global stage. We mentioned already Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria has been appointed Director General of the World Trade Organization. She was head of department, vice president in the World Bank. She was a finance minister in Nigeria. I worked with her as managing director of the IMF. She knows about all of this, and I'm sure we have given the World Trade Organization in good hands, in her good hands. A second person is also the Senegalese finance minister Mactar Diop, will become the head of World Bank's International Finance Corporation, the IFC, which is dedicated to build up private sector activity in the economies. And we know already that an Ethiopian, Tedros Ghebreyesus, is the head of the World Health Organization. So, last but not least, and I want really to underline this point, whenever I come to Africa, even in these days, not so often like former days, but last year, and I hope also in the future, I try to meet with young people. And whenever I feel being a bit depressed, what about our youth here in Europe? I'm faced with European, with the African youth, and I'm thrilled by their creativity, by their ideas. So with their creativity and persistence, this African youth, in my view, is a powerful force of transformation for the continent. And whatever we do, we should always have one kind of direction. Try to include the youth. Try to get to know their ideas. Try to let them participate in decision. And from my point of view, I have no doubt the outcome will be a positive one.
You now just mentioned a couple of times Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria, and as you said, and I know this, that you know her very well, we are really curious about what was your reaction when you heard about her appointment. And she is like, as more or less all of our watchers and users here on the stream might know, she's the first woman and first African to occupy this role. What was your personal reaction? What is your expectation, especially to her as the new Director General on the WTO, the World Trade Organization?
Well, my first reaction was the right person for a very important job. And second reaction was, I know that she knows all this machinery of the international policy approach, particularly in economic questions. And she's well familiar with people, with organizations, so she knows how to, say, manage international issues. Mm-hmm. And I have no doubt that as an African, she will bring also a new element. That is the question of how can we learn together? Because that is her own experience. She learned a lot when she was at the World Bank. She learned a lot as Nigerian finance minister. And she learned that nobody, that is, I say it because we discussed it, and she was also a member of this expert panel for the African Development Bank. She knows that nobody has the kind of monopoly to know what's the right way forward. You need to listen, you need to exchange, you need to also reflect with us and discuss. And on this basis, I'm sure she will be an advocate for more kind of international awareness about interdependence. And on this basis, she will try to bring together voices who pay respect for the international dimensions of policy. And I'm sure, and this is what I request, have a request to her, bring forward the African interest. You, as an head of the World Trade Organization, she has to be, say, neutral in terms of national interest, and she will. But the African continent is a major kind of region for growth of trade and investment, and therefore she will speak up to tap this potential, and it will be in the interest of all of us.
Coming to a conclusion now of our talk, and I think you raised a lot of interesting fields and a lot of very important steps which needs to be taken. You are known as a strategist and also as a very well related former president. So you're known for your network to African relations. What should be now? What should be done first as concrete steps in the upcoming month to strengthen and to maybe to strengthen the new partnership, the new African-European partnership? What should be done concretely?
Well, I mean, it's not too difficult to answer. The top priority must be to ensure Africans have equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines as quickly as possible, and richer countries must step up to help in their own interest. So that is the most urgent short-term issue where we need to work together on appropriate answers to this pandemic. If the virus is allowed to spread, it will transform and reinfect the whole world. The race against the virus must be a race between countries, must not be a race between countries, but a common race against time. That is my point. And to be fair, Europe has invested both political energy and money in creating the global access to COVID-19 tools accelerator, that's called, and the COVAX platform, together with World Health Organization. It gives poorer countries access to vaccines at a lower price or free of charge. Germany has recently pledged another 1.5 billion euros. The US, President Biden, has finally also joined and pledged a total of $4 billion for this, platform. And therefore, there is already something in place for the global distribution, and this is helpful. But in a world where only 10 countries have administered 75% of vaccines, and 130 countries have not even received a single dose, we also need to share already existing vaccines and build up production of vaccines. And Federal German President Steinmeier, and I somehow like it very much because it's my president, and I like what he said. Like President Macron also called on the rich countries to share existing vaccines, saying, quote, Steinmeier, it's not easy, but it's a question of humanity, and here, I underline, a question of our own standards. As you may recall at the beginning, I said Europe has to be aware. Double standards are no longer the way forward. They are an impediment for improving a world situation. And most important also, money and sharing alone won't make more vaccines available. Production is for the moment a critical bottleneck. And here we need to have some new ideas, and the Secretary General of the United Nations has also made clear here we need to come together, and I see some energy, and I hopefully in the next month we will see more about who is increasing production of vaccines also in Africa. Financial support will be needed. So my second point for the most immediate tasks. Financial support will be needed to avoid economic breakdown in Africa. The G20 have prolonged their initial debt service suspension initiative, DSSI, until June 2021. That is a good start, I'm sure. But for some countries, more debt relief and possibly also debt restructuring may prove necessary. African governments urgently have to get access to new resources to confront the economic fallout of the COVID-19 crisis, while advanced economies spend around 24% of their GDP for recovery measures, stimulus. Low-income countries spend only 2%, leaving even farther behind. So it is good, therefore, and this is really good because I know how difficult it is as former managing director of the IMF. It is good news that just yesterday, the US Secretary of the Treasury, Ms. Yellen, announced the cautiously formulated but announced, in my view, a clear support to a new allocation of special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund, meaning a hard currency, access of hard currency. Vera Songwe, the head of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, proposed at the same day in the Financial Times the issuance of 500 billion special drawing rights, that is about $659 billion, and suggested furthermore, and that is very important, that G7 and G20 countries should voluntarily reallocate their SDRs at the IMF to an interest-bearing facility to support low-income countries. That is possible, but it needs, of course, political will to decide on this. And this proposal deserves serious consideration. And in my view, Europe should be an advocate for this way forward.
So there are concrete demands on the table, if we understand you rightly. And as you are known as an optimist, And I think we also have heard this in your words here, in your remarkable words we just had. What would you expect for 2021? We are at the beginning of a year, which starts difficult, and COVID-19 is not yet is not finished yet. With regard for the African European partnership, what are your expectations for this year?
Well, it's a hope, not an expectation, that both continents, the leaders of both continents, will move beyond the decades-old behavior patterns and realize their common interest to move forward. Let this crisis be a turning point. That is my hope, if you want so. And I have some kind also expectation that it moves in this direction. And that means three things. Three things. Get people vaccinated in Africa, like in Europe, and move beyond this pandemic. The equal access is a demonstration that African people care as much as European people or American people. First point. A second point, find effective ways for liquidity support and debt relief for African countries and bring economies on a new sustainable path of growth. That is possible with investment, with this what we outlined, support from the international financial institutions. And if this happens, the pandemic has already done a good job. And last, finally, define a long-term strategy of partnership between Africa and Europe. A long-term partnership between Africa and Europe based on a new culture of a new culture of encounters. Not just this way that the Europeans or the Americans or the North travels to Africa and lectures them. The time of lecturing Africans is over, certainly over, and we should be all happy about that. So a new culture of encounters and mutual learning. Mutual learning. If Africa comes on its own feet, becomes a new hub for global growth, who is also have some advantage. That's the North. That's Europe first. Therefore, the two continents, in my view, could and should set an example and show that cooperation is in the enlightened interest for both continents, and that the well-being of the other is an investment in one's own future. That's my kind of hope. And to be honest, I even think, also coming back to the African youth, we are in Germany, in Europe, aging societies. Aging societies, but at the end, rich societies. The Africans' societies are mostly poor societies, but young societies. And what would be, it would be a tremendous idea and historic development if we would bridge these asymmetries, so that let's say the older societies in Europe have a bridge via their financing, say, possibilities to the young investment needs in Africa, and both will at the end have an advantage for that. That's my kind of little vision for these two continents, and if we could move in this direction, we could also set a good example how the world in the 21st century can still have a promise for all people in the world.
Thank you very much, Professor Köhler, for these very informative and profound analysis of the developments of the African continents and your visions. And I stick very strongly in my head that lecturing time is over and mutual learning needs to be achieved. Thank you very much for addressing that. And in the light and addressing the developments need in the light of COVID-19. So thank you very much for these insights.
Thank you, you too.
And also, we would like to thank our users of our 10 web video talks we already had right now. We want also to thank you for your attendance. And this was the last episode of our first series, Africa Talks. Also from my side, again, we really appreciate your contribution and the conversation with you, President Köhler. We wish you all that we stay and that you stay healthy. We wish you that you're getting out of this COVID pandemic, as we heard. It still will last a couple of time. I think we need to be patient and to stay patient. But at the end, we are all optimists here. And this was my message, that we had former Federal President Köhler here on the show, and he really shows his personal optimism. And I think there are things moving. And as we said, there are people from Africa coming into international institutions, etc. PP. So I think we have optimistic signs, and so we should work on to find and to create a new era between the African and the European continent. I think there are a lot of opportunities to win. All the best to all of you. Take care, stay healthy, and goodbye. Thank you.
And I would like to thank all the people behind the scene who make that possible, who are not seen but who support it, that we were able to manage to get together the 10 episodes. And I would like to end with a reference of Chimamanda Adichie, African novelist, that diverse stories are needed and that we need a shift from single storytelling about African continent, but to move towards different and diverse storytelling. So I hope we contributed a little bit towards telling diverse set of stories, and in these 10 episodes, but also today. So thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.